It's a,
Here we go. And thank you so much for getting us a camera on a game. I have been wanting a game for an hour or so.
Yes, as have I.
Now, we don't know what these two players are playing yet. None of our scouts on the floor have come back to us with information on what it is. But we'll see probably soon enough as we get a chance to get a good camera angle, get a little glimpse at some of these cards.
And one of these players is definitely going to disappoint either Drew Levin, Chris Anderson, Garrett Young, or Michael Burnett.
I mean, honestly, one of these players will definitely 100% knock one of them out.
Yes.
And importantly, if Eric Rill beats Steven Barrios, it's possible that Eric Rill could knock out one of these guys.
It is a distinct possibility.
I mean, one of them is definitely getting bumped.
Although it's doubtful that, Chris or Drew can be knocked out by Eric Rill or Steven Barrios.
It's less likely. I mean, some stuff would have to go wrong, but you have to remember that one of the things that happens is when we're talking about these opponents' match win percentage, they could have 7 or 8 people that are with them that all win. Like every one of their opponents from the previous set could win, and they could go up a good 3%. Okay. We have from Ben Robinson. I see red cards. I see it looks like a contested. No, I'm wrong. That's a red and white. So Boros.
Yes.
There we go.
Looks
Boros.
like he is the sort of feast and famine slinger of the day.
On the other side, I couldn't quite make it out. So we've got Boros versus Brian playing. Is that a Fauna Shaman?
That is a.
Playing green with trolls and Vengevines, like crazy RPG.
Plated Geopede, I believe. Is that Plated Geopede hitting the table?
It's like 4 birds, 4 elves, 4 black guy, 4 Vengevines, shamans, and then the trolls.
Right. So we've got a Boros deck and facing 2 Stirring Wildwoods. I see a Fauna Shaman and a Squadron Hawk in Brian's hand.
Yes, he has cards like Thrun. He has Leatherback Baloth. He has Vengevines. He has Eldrazi Monument. He has Sword of Feast and Famine and a Sword of Body and Mind. Oh, he has a Core Skyfisher also, which is a pretty nice target for his Fauna Shaman, so that he can get back a bunch of Vengevines. Seems like a pretty good trick to have, especially against, like... Ooh, yes, he's also playing Garrick. That seems like a pretty good choice. This is interesting. So, it looks like the Ross is... missing his third land drop here, so he's got a pretty tough decision to make.
I think I see a Lotus Cobra. Yeah, so there's a Fauna Shaman, a Lotus Cobra. Oh, and there is a land there. It's
Yes.
just coming
Okay.
into play tapped. It eats a quick burn spell. Another hit for 6, or I should say another hit for 5 from the Geopede.
Yeah, Geopede swings hard, man.
Yeah, don't get to tell me that. And
you're
here
a
we
fan
have a
of-
sword. Red open for a potential burn spell.
Is that Body and Mind, or is that Feast and Famine? I believe that's Body and Mind.
Body and mind.
They look very similar. So, this is a pretty aggressive start from the Burrows deck.
Yeah. And without a Bird of Paradise from Brian's hand.
He also had a... ooh,
What is that saucy
that
number?
is a Mirren Crusader.
Wow.
He is.
Okay.
So
Here it comes.
in they come.
That sword of body and mind is on a plated geopede. There is a landfall trigger, so it's going to be a big hit. And the Squadron Hawk is going to hit for 1. Meanwhile, the Mirren Crusader is just dead.
Yeah. It's forced to chum.
And Ben Robinson here, he is still full of gas. I mean,
Yeah, he's not running out anytime
yeah,
soon.
his hand is still full. I mean, I don't care if they're Squadron Hawks. There's still going to be something that can pick up a sword. Is
I'm
that going to
surprised
be another
that's-
sword?
That is a sort of feast and famine.
Okay, there's both sides of it. I'm not sure what you're going to have to do here other than,
Just lose?
magic a Day of Judgment into play.
Magical
And-
fairy dust.
Yeah,
That's-
magic
that's-
fairy dust once
That is
again.
the answer. We need a judge coming over to the table and finding out that a player is playing 61 cards in their deck. But I doubt that's going to happen,
I'm right there with you.
especially at this stage in the tournament. People are quite careful.
Okay. I mean,
Then we
I
have,
think with his life total this low, there pretty much isn't very little left that he can do unless he has. He's got crack that. He's going to have access to 4 mana. I'm trying to think about cards that would help him out here.
It seems
I mean, Linvala would
Pretty
go a long
unlikely.
way. I mean, it wouldn't solve his problems, but it would put up something that has a sizable body on the table. And there we have the Crusader once again.
yeah, and it's just not going to be enough.
And there's that
Another
plated
fetch land from Ben.
geopede is just huge. He's gonna cast the sword so he can put it on probably his.
Squadron Hawk.
Yep.
He has to untap all of his lands after he hits him.
Here they come. Somebody's got to get in the way of that geopede.
Yeah.
I think I don't know the contents of Brian's deck, but I feel like the only possible line of play that might get him somewhere is if he chump blocks with the Crusader, leaves the Lotus Cobra alive, and then drops a Baneslayer, or hopefully a Baneslayer plus something.
Yeah. It does not seem likely that he can win from the spot, though.
Oh, it's really pretty terrible, and he just picks it up.
Yeah. So, Ben Robinson won the first game. He, had an aggressive start, both swords, with plated geopede. His draw could have been more aggressive. Brian stumbled a bit. He was on the draw, and both of his first 2 land drops came into play tapped. It prevented him from playing a 2-drop, which allowed Ben to play a removal spell and a second guy on his 3rd turn. That gave him the tempo advantage he needed, and he just rode it to victory. He basically stayed ahead throughout the entire game. Cards like Squadron Hawk may seem like a little underpowered in that type of strategy, but when you have access to Stoneforge Mystic and equipment, having that number of flyers and that type of density makes it really difficult, especially for creature decks that are planning on tapping out. Because if you ever tap out and your opponent has 4 lands in play with a Stoneforge Mystic and a Sword of Feast and Famine in hand, it's basically impossible to win. Sword of Feast and Famine makes you untap all of your lands after you hit your opponent with it, and then they have to discard a card. So you hit them with it, you get the value of the extra damage, they have to discard a card, and then you get to untap your lands and use them again. It actually gives more value to cards like Squadron Hawk also, because normally those cards clog up your hand and they don't have as much value, but when you're able to just play them with such ease, it's just absolutely excellent. Brian is, sideboarding for this game now. I'm sure he has a lot of good answers. He's a green-white deck. Traditionally, green and white have the best sideboard cards, especially considering the current standard format. The interesting part, though, is that green and white right now are missing the removal aspect. They don't have a card like Path, and that makes this equipment-based type of strategy very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, a Journey to Nowhere comes down so slowly that
Yeah.
it's going to be after the sword has done its work.
Yeah, as sorcery speed removal does not have as much value against these equipment-based decks, and that's really all that the green and white decks have access to.
And we look at the sideboard here. Brian Boss's plan includes 4 Journey to Nowhere, 4 Obstinate Baloth, 3 Linvala. Now, he has a Basilisk Collar, which I also think can do some work here, just as a means to recoup some of the losses.
I mean, he has an extra monument also, which has a great deal of value in this type of
Yeah.
matchup. So,
And if you look at this deck of Brian Boss's, it's an unusual deck. You know, it has Mana Acceleration and Fauna Shaman, and then Leatherback Baloth, Mirren Crusader, Vengevine, Thrun.
yeah, this
You
deck
know,
looks good, man.
It's drop a monster, drop a monster, drop a monster. And then his tricks are 1 Core Sky Fixture, 1 Stoneforge Mystic, and 1 Acidic Slime.
And he has a Bone Horde.
Bone Horde is such a beating.
Yeah, he's got a Mortivore in his deck.
God.
And he's got a Mortivore in his deck that he can tutor for with a Stoneforge Mystic.
Yeah.
That's pretty sweet.
On the other side of the table, we see something that is actually potentially incredibly devastating. 3 Cunning Spark Mage and a Basilisk Collar. A Cunning Spark Mage from the Boros deck is just devastating in this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that Brian probably expected coming into this tournament. Cunning Spark Mage is a card that seems like a little dated as far as red decks go. The Kadaltha red decks don't have it, and he probably wasn't expecting as much Burrows today.
Yeah.
Considering that the players who normally would play that type of strategy, he'd assumed they were probably on a Kadaltha red deck.
One of the things I like about how Brian's deck is positioned is because he's actually fairly low to the curve with some of these beasts that he has. You know, like a Leatherback Baloth and a Thrun, they can get out there with even like the slightest stumble of kill your mana. If he doesn't have a burn spell for that first bird or elf, there could be a Leatherback Baloth, and then the game can just fall apart for the Boros player.
Something that's very interesting to me here is we were, trying to keep an eye out for which cards from Mirror to Besieged were going to be really good this weekend, and I noticed that both of these decks have Mirren Crusader in the main deck. The Burrows deck and the green-white aggro deck.
Yeah.
That was a card I didn't necessarily think would be a breakout card this weekend, but apparently people have been talking about it, and it's been doing really well.
That's cool.
It works especially well with the equipment.
Yes. Now, Pro Green is very relevant against these Baloths.
Yes.
Okay. Looks like almost at the point to present.
Now, Ben is mulliganing a bit here. I mean, Brian being on the play with an opponent who's going down cards, he probably feels pretty good about his chances. I don't know if this match really favors him, though. It seems really rough. I mean, if his opponent can assemble Spark Mage Collar, it's all but over.
Right.
He has Acidic Slime, which is his real only way to break up the combo, and he still has a ton of 1 toughness guys afterwards, so the Spark Mage alone will do some work.
I think Eldrazi Monument is going to be one of his answers to Cunning Spark Mage, is get it out before the Cunning Spark Mage gets to work.
Yeah, if he can stick a monument, he's in great shape. Otherwise, it's
In the second turn, we have Stirring Wildwood and a Forest, and that looks like a Terramorphic Expanse on the other side of the table. And waiting to see if he has a turn 2 play to do anything with that. Fauna Shaman, there we go.
oh, his deck will always have a turn 2 play. If he doesn't have a turn 2 play, then he did not mulligan properly.
Well, I agree with you, but maybe I should have said waiting to see what the turn 2 play is.
Now he has. It doesn't look like he has another creature in his hand. Fauna Shaman. I think his hand is Eldrazi Monument, Journey to Nowhere,
Basilisk Collar, and land.
lands.
Yeah. Here's the kill spell. And it just basically functions as a small time warp. Basilisk Collar, go. One of the dangers of being an equipment deck is when you do this.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, his opponent, if this is, say, like a Cunning Spark Mage or a Mirren Crusader,
I think it's probably going to be a Mirror Crusader. I think Cunning Spark Mage is more the type of card you play as a removal spell initially, and then gain value out of it as the game progresses.
and here we see Stoneforge Mystic going out to fetch up perhaps a Adventuring Gear or perhaps the Basilisk Collar from the board. Maybe he's going to go with the sword if he doesn't have a...
Yeah, Sword of Feast and Famine seems pretty good here.
Yep.
And now I get to play Step Links. And that's a beating. That's going to be hard. Now, Brian needs a non-green creature here. So he's going to... Oh,
Bail off.
it's not even close to what he needs. The Baloth's good, but what's going to happen here is he has the land, right? So he makes the Step Links into a 4/5. He activates his Stoneforge Mystic. He equips the Step Links with the sword. He gets in there for 6 damage. His opponent will be forced to discard a card. At which point he will get to untap all of his lands, and then he gets to start reserving. So, and he's got a handful of red spells. I don't even know what they are, but
And Brian's already got his card ready. He's tapped out, knows he can't block. Loses the monument, maybe? What is that he lost?
yeah, looks like the monument.
Bolt. Bolt.
Bolt. Arc Trail.
Same difference.
Yes. Only his opponent takes 2. So, Brian goes down to 15 here.
And there's a journey here. I guess you use it. You know, what else are you going to do? Lay out a guy that can't block and lay the land that you would otherwise discard. Does not equip his guy with the collar.
He's getting in there. Gets to untap his lands again.
Go for it.
It's so good.
He is at the point though where it doesn't look like he has anything to do with that mana anymore.
Yeah, but his opponent doesn't really have. His opponent doesn't really have much of an answer, though.
Yeah, this is true.
I mean, his opponent really needs something like.
Journey to Nowhere, Linvala.
Yeah, I mean, those cards are. Do you think he'd bring in Linvala here? I guess he.
I mean,
he most certainly does.
A 3/4 body is still good. That turns off
Spark Mage.
Spark Mage.
He doesn't necessarily. I guess he would assume.
I would think Spark
Spark
Mage might be a real issue.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what comes off the top. He's going to be able to cast it. And it looks like a land to me.
Does look like land.
Activates the Wildwood, equips the collar to it.
Has he equipped the color?
He's going to.
Okay. And he gets in for 4 and gains 3.
Yep. It's not terrible.
It's not bad at all.
Yep. 13,
I mean, he's basically, by that attack, nullifying the damage that's coming into him from the only creature that Ben Robinson has.
Yeah. I mean, Ben Mulligan 5 this game, so. So
Oh,
venturing here.
boy. He doesn't have very many cards left, so there it is. Fetch land. Crack it for +4 damage.
Yep.
So it's going to be 4, that's going to be 5, it's going to be
7.
7 damage. Knock you to 6. Now, I will say, though, that leaves him with only the 3/4 Stoneforge Mystic that might become a 7/8 on the table. only.
Yeah. That's all he's got. If he draws Squadron Hawk, he gets 4 1/1 flyers. All on the same turn.
This is true. Okay, so Brian looks unexcited by his draw. It's going to be a repeat of last turn. Recoup a little bit of that life. Go up to 9. And then just be prepared to either lay this land in that he drew or discard whatever it was.
I mean, it's it's not the worst position that he's in right now. They're both in top deck mode.
Cunning Spark Mage.
And that's a pretty good one.
Okay. So right now we've got a 3/4.
Yeah, I think he's going to attack with his Mystic, and then he's going to equip the sword onto the Spark Mage. That way the Spark Mage can block the lifelink creature and shoot the elf.
Yep. And that was a Bird of Paradise that he just discarded? Took the 1 damage rather than lay a bird.
Seems reasonable.
Totally reasonable. Okay. So he's got a Llanowar elf that he just drew.
Top 8. Please have your deck sorted. We will be checking those prior to top 8. If you have your deck ready, you can drop that
Says
off
go.
with us on stage. We will check that and have it waiting for you for the quarterfinals tonight.
Squadron
That's
Hawk.
a lot of dudes.
There we go. What are the ways to make this game be recouped?
It does not seem... I think it's out of his hands at this point.
The only way I can picture it is if he gets Runner, Obstinate Baloth, and then does something really impressive on top of it. Actually, a path better than Runner, Obstinate is Baloth into Core Skyfisher, recast Baloth. Then you've got a 2/3 flyer. You put a collar on that guy that he can block something. I mean, that's obviously, living the dream. God.
Yeah.
And here comes the hand.
Yeah. And unfortunately, Brian is once again eliminated at X1.
I'm gonna see if we can get another match in.